Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, good. Well, we are very pleased to have back with us Atlas Society founder David Kelley. And, we're going to get your personal take on the elections and maybe the soon to be controversial Philadelphia Declaration, a statement of shared values you had a hand in. But the main reason I wanted to bring you back was because you have a new paper out on propositions, which I played the tiniest role doing some research on what other objectivists have said on the subject. So, you know, uh, thank you so much for being here, David.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. I'm glad to talk about one of my favorite topics.
Good. So, Ayn Rand intended to write a second book on epistemology about propositions, but she didn't get to it. But let's, just starting with the substance of the paper. I mean, why do we need to analyze propositions for philosophy? I mean, isn't it just, using sentences, something everyone does?
It is something everyone does, but not many people know what they're doing. And that's one of the challenges of talking or writing about this issue of propositions, because people say, I try to describe to people outside philosophy what the paper is dealing with. And, uh, if I don't put it in common sense terms completely, if I use philosophical language, the normal reaction is, okay, I was just wondering. And eyes glaze over. But the thing is, Rand developed the theory of concepts, which is a really crucial understanding issue in philosophy. It has been since ancient Greece and before, because that's the way we organize the world. That's what makes humans different from lower animals, who can perceive and have some kinds of memory, but cannot form an abstract concept like even a simple concept like dog. I mean, let alone a more complex one like justice. So that's important, and Rand did a brilliant job on that topic. But concepts are only the first step into what we can call generally the conceptual level, because a concept is a category. It names a category, like dog.
Right.
Okay. If I just say dog, I haven't said anything. I mentioned a kind of thing in the world, but I haven't said anything about them. And similarly, if I just say barks, there's barks. I haven't said anything, but when I say dogs bark, I'm making a statement about the nature of something in reality. I'm picking out something in reality, dogs, the category of things, and I'm saying something about one of their properties. So, and we put that in language, and we speak in sentences, and anyone who learns a language just learns to use the language, but we take it for granted. But for philosophers, here are some questions that come up. The most important one, I think, is truth. What we say can be either true or false. There's a lot of falsehood around. We're fallible. We can jump to conclusions. We can, be subject to confirmation bias. We see a lot of that around, political issues these days. So we're fallible, and so we make mistakes. And what is it to make a mistake? What is the relationship between what's in our mind, the thought, or in our expression, the verbal statement? How does that relate to reality? And some philosophers have said, well, there are actually universals out there. There's a thing in reality called the dog. That's a property out there in the world. And we just open our eyes and grasp it and then we can use it in a proposition. And but Rand's view and the objectivist view is, no, what's out there in the world apart from us is just this dog, that dog, this cat, this river, etc., all particular, all concrete existence. And so we do the grouping of things into categories. But how do we do that? And what's a valid grouping versus what's not a valid grouping? And propositions, concept, theory of concept, as important as it is, concepts are not complete until we consider what propositions, because that's the point of concepts. They allow us to make statements about categories of things, about properties, about abstract or much more general issues like Newton's law, about gravity and the Earth, which is a statement about everything really. And so we but what makes that true? What makes it true? I mean, to prove it, we have to engage in reasoning and experimentation and hypothesis testing and so forth. But the question I'm dealing with is, what's there in reality that makes this statement dogs bark? What's out there in reality? Just this dog, that dog, this sound, that sound. And concepts explain how we group things, but then, as I was saying, an individual word or concept doesn't make a statement. To make a statement, you have to have a subject and a predicate. We all learn this in grammar, and the statement has a kind of completeness to it. And this is the second issue. The first issue is what determines truth or falsity. What does it mean for a statement to be true or false? But the second issue is what makes a proposition distinct in making an assertion? There's a kind of unity that comes around from when I say dogs bark. That statement I'm combining a subject, dogs, and a predicate, they bark, into a complete thought. We all learned about, I hope they're still teaching grammar in junior high or middle school, that, you should, here's what a complete sentence is. What we call a fragment is an incomplete sentence, and it just hangs there. Like, my dog, well, my dog what? I haven't said anything yet. Anyway, so two issues about propositions that I deal with in the paper. And I use propositions and statements kind of as equivalent terms here. But a proposition has a kind of unity that its individual components, the subject and the predicate by themselves, do not have. And propositions are true or false, or can be true or false. So Rand, I should say that, Rand acknowledged in her classic work, The Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, that she had not addressed the issue of propositions. Scott, you mentioned that she intended to, but
I think it's implied.
She did say quite a bit, because an axiom is, to jump ahead a little bit to what I think will be one of William's questions, an axiom is a statement. A is A thing cannot be A and not A in the same respect and the same time. That's an axiom. I am conscious, that's an axiom. And so those are all statements. Our concepts are the locus, the pattern in our body of knowledge that give it structure. But the content of a concept would be empty if we didn't know anything about the things that we're referring to. So, we've got to, so you can think of concepts as file folders. That was Rand's analogy. File folders for storing all the knowledge, the propositional knowledge that we gather about it, some kind of thing, whether it's dogs barking, humans running, convertible debentures or whatever. So that is the, I think I've wandered a little bit off your question, Scott. But
No, it's good. I'll defer to William for the next one. I've got some follow-ups.
Yeah, so one of the things you say in your paper is that concepts and propositions have an intimate relationship. Obviously, propositions are built from concepts, but I'm thinking, is there any way in which a concept can be considered a proposition? Because you use concepts in both thought and language or speech. So maybe in speech, if you just say the word dog, people might not understand any sort of statement there. But if you're thinking it to yourself, just dog, if I do that, I kind of come up with this vague image of what a dog looks like, this animal with four legs and we have as pets. And so you kind of, in your mind, you have this like maybe proto proposition where um, it does imply something, like what a dog is. So you're already sort of creating proposition in your mind when you say dog. You kind of understand where I'm going.
I do, yes. I mean, think of an infant or a very young person that his parents are trying to teach him words. He's at that stage where he's capable of learning them, and parent points to the household pet and says dog. That's just uttering one word, but what it really means is that's a dog. That's a dog, and so because a child can't, he has to acquire a certain body of concepts before he can put them into sentences. That'll come, but so in speech we have all kinds of shortcuts that we use, but if we spelled out what is actually being thought or spoken, it would be in propositional form.
So there's an explicit proposition, which we generally form during speech. And then maybe there's like this implicit sort of proposition that we might just be thinking.
Well, yes, if you wonder if William, if we're in a zoo or something and we see an animal that I don't recognize and you say, okay, that's a zebra. I think I could recognize a zebra, but anyway, that lousy example. But you just say zebra, and I said, and I understand what you mean is that's a zebra. That's the type of animal it is, and so that's a shortcut in speech. But underneath it, or what the sentence means, if we spelled it out and you stated it fully, would be that's a zebra. Or zebras have stripes or whatever it might be, and that's what I grasp when I understand your statement.
Right.
So it's not quite implicit. It's implicit in one way, in that we don't have to spell it out.
Grammatically, it's implied, right?
Grammatically, yes, that's the structure of what you said. If I were to spell it out in like a sentence diagram.
I see.
Another thing, I don't know if they teach it anymore, but I love those things. So, with subject, predicate, modifier, verb, it's all that.
Well, I studied English in college, so I have some familiarity with it.
Okay,
But yeah,
right.
they don't teach grammar very much anymore.
Oh God. Well, that's why the world's going to hell in a handcart. One of the reasons. Anyway, that is different from, another kind of implicit proposition is the kind that it sometimes happens in a psychotherapist's office. The therapist asked me why I'm afraid of, let's say, afraid of asking the boss for a raise. Well, he might turn me down. Psychologist says, well, what's so bad about that? You asked, you didn't get it. Okay, move on. But that causes fear in me. So the psychologist wants to know what the fear is. And eventually in successful therapy, we get to an underlying premise that I didn't even know I had, to the effect that if anyone rejects me, I'm no good. That might be an example. And so that's implicit way down in my subconscious and my, my scale of values and thoughts. And it's not something we just, spell out in a sentence diagram. It's something we have to discover. So there are many ways in which, a lot of our knowledge is implicit. A lot of the things that we believe are implicit, both knowledge and assumptions.
Is it fair to say that the paper in some sense validates Rand's theory of concepts? I mean, if only by building on them, because you definitely, talk about that a lot in building your case early on.
Oh, I think so, yes. Because the theory of concepts, Rand's theory of concepts, I think allows us to build on it to have a viable theory of propositions, their nature, what makes them unified, and a complete statement, a complete thought, and what makes them true or false, and how that relates to reality. That has been a classic problem. The whole issue of truth in philosophy, again, goes back to the ancient times. And people say, well, true statement means it corresponds to reality. That's a correspondence theory. That's a more realist.
Right. That's another big concept you talk about, the correspondence theory of truth.
Right. But the problem is, a true statement corresponds to the facts, right? Well, what are facts? What kind of status do they have? I mean, there are material objects, conscious beings, there are actions, there are relationships, all of them very concrete, and all of them exist out there in the world. But where do we put facts? What kind of thing is a fact? That if there were no humans, or at least no conceptual beings who could speak, would there be facts in the world or not? Many people, including myself, say no, there wouldn't be. The reality just is what it is. All the specific things that actually exist out there, facts have a different level and they depend. I'm getting into deep waters here, but facts are what we grasp in a statement that's true. But the fact itself is just is a name for a large body of concretes that have been determined or identified by a prior level of concepts.
It implies a knower for whom that fact has any relevance.
That's
right, a knower, and so
not just a knower, right, but a evaluator, right? You have to evaluate what you're experiencing and then come to some judgment, and then that becomes the fact.
Well, you have to evaluate it epistemologically, as why do I think this? Why would this be a fact? And that gets us into inference and proof and what philosophers call justification, establishing the evidence for proposition. But the proposition itself is we evaluate it. We use the word evaluation. I would say there's epistemological evaluation. There's also the moral or value related. Is this good for me or bad for me? Is this a threat or a possible benefit? which is more emotional. And emotions are not detached from reason; they're just a different function.
More in the realm of the man-made. Um, I'm curious how propositions can be even purposefully misused by people to, portray reality in a way that advances their worldview.
Well, yeah, that's like falling off a log. I mean, people do that all the time, and um, you know, because I mentioned before, we're not fallible, we're not omniscient, so we can make mistakes. But there is also deliberate deception or semi-deliberate, I just glom onto some statement in politics that, like, Kamala Harris is a communist, to pick a timely example. And then I say it, I don't actually, people who do that may well not have a clear concept of what a communist is.
Nor
And,
fascist when they call Trump.
yes, exactly. So all these epithets get slung around just as statements that are put forward not for cognitive reasons, but for emotional or expressive or trying to gain something, trying to promote a cause, which is not the purpose of thought.
Right. It's like, oh, you don't want to join Black Lives Matter? What? You don't think Black Lives Matter?
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be a great instance. Yeah, and that's a great example, Scott, because you know Black Lives Matter is itself a sentence, and it it puts things in a way that is, puts anyone who does not admire or agree with Black Lives, the group, um, puts them at a loss, saying, exactly what you said. You don't think Black Lives Matter? Um,
Unfortunately, it's terribly effective.
yes, right. And that's the other thing. And here we are definitely getting into the moral evaluation or emotional dimensions, that people are scared of being thought to believe X, right? X is a nasty view. Fascism as a theory is a nasty thing. No one wants to be a fascist, um, except Hitler. But and no one wants to be a racist. And even people for whom who are the farthest thing you can imagine from being racist, who are even-handed and so forth, the way they treat people are still scared of that. Whereas they're not scared of saying, someone calls me blonde. Well, it's false. I'm not blonde, but it's not an insult. It's just a mistake. But if someone says I'm a racist because I'm, a white
For
male,
capitalism.
or I'm for capitalism, better, yeah. Um, that is, it's either deliberate misinformation or a misstatement, or a thoughtless statement on the part of people who know the connotations of racism but don't understand what the term actually means.
Yeah, it's also a great way to browbeat moderates into submission. Um, you mentioned Harry Binswanger's take on propositions in your paper. Can you talk about your kind of main differences on the topic?
Yeah, but sort of briefly, this is it, the issue with Harry is that it has to do with that the one topic that I mentioned, the unity of a proposition, or the
Right.
unification. Um, he says that a concept is a kind of unity. It integrates a concept dog integrates all dogs into one category, and so we refer to the entire category with one word, one concept. A proposition is made up out of concepts, and its expression as a sentence is made up out of words. So it's his argument, at least in part, one of the arguments he uses is that well, you can see the structure of a proposition. It's out there, different words, different concepts. So where's the unification? And I think that's wrong. And this whole issue of what actually is the unity of a proposition is another age-old problem. And I think it's one that deserves an answer because, as I've been saying all along, just saying one word normally would not mean making a statement or uttering a proposition. And we have a very clear concept of what is a complete thought or a complete sentence, as opposed to a word, a phrase, a fragment of a sentence. So my answer is that it goes back to an axiomatic level. When we form concepts, let me put it this way. Go back to our hackneyed example, dogs bark. If I'm looking at a dog and perceiving it, I see its shape, I see its color, I hear its barking. Maybe I can smell it or whatever, but it's this dog that I'm focused on. Whereas if I form the concept dog, I'm abstracting from all the differences among all the individual dogs in the world, the endless number of dogs there are in the world. I'm just saying, reducing them all to one unit, and regardless, and I'm putting aside the differences that actually exist between dogs, between a Chihuahua and a German Shepherd or something. And the predicate, when I say, go back to our example, dogs make all kinds of sounds. No two dogs probably have exactly the same bark. Some are noticeably different, a little whimper or a loud, bone-chilling bark. But when I say dogs bark, I'm taking that concept bark, and focusing just on the identity of the sound. So I could also say, some walruses bark or seals bark, because the sound is fairly similar. But it's only when we put the subject and predicate together that we have a statement, and that is a unity that goes beyond. This is my argument against Harry. It does have a unity that goes beyond the individual component words or concepts, and that has to be explained. And I do explain it by saying, every statement ultimately has a form. A thing is what it is, and that's an axiom. So that's a way of reunifying the subject and the predicate. We've abstracted both of them. We're focused. We have a concept of dogs as a subject category and barking as a predicate category, and now we're attributing that identity to that subject, and that the underlying structure of it is the thing is what it is, which is self-evident. So that's where explanation ends.
In your paper, you used an analogy which I found helpful. You compared propositions to chemical compounds.
Yes.
And this reminded me of how Ayn Rand used math to explain concept formation. So how did you come to this idea of comparing propositions to chemical compounds? And what's the significance of this analogy?
Well, the significance is, it like a lot of analogies, it's very distant in some way because we're talking about chemistry versus epistemology. But what I don't know when or how this occurred to me. I might have seen it somewhere else in something I read. I don't think Rand used it, but I could be wrong even about that. But the point is, what struck me about the analogy is that in a chemical compound and a chemical mixture, there are different elements in that solution or that, whatever it is. But they differ. In one case, the compound, they're actually unified, like H2O is, there's hydrogen, there's oxygen, but H2O is water, and that has properties that neither hydrogen nor oxygen have on their own. And so that's why it struck me. That could be a good analogy, and it does help. I think it helps concretize the point. So, but honestly, I don't remember where I came up with that. I think it might have been in the process of writing this paper. It was just, one of those things that occurs to you when you're thinking and writing.
You think it's strange, or I don't know what the best word is, but the notion that these philosophical ideas have a relationship to the sciences, like hard sciences. You think that's just coincidence, or there's some natural link there?
Oh, well, there's definitely a link between, conscious phenomena and physical phenomena. I mean, our conscious functioning is, enabled by a physical brain, and that's true as far as we know of all animals. But one thing that is true in almost anything written about the mind, or anything that we think about the mind, what we know about our minds comes from introspection. But introspection is hard, and it's not quite as definite and concrete. So when we can have a physical analogy for conscious functions, it helps clarify. So, for example, in people trying to understand the relationship between consciousness and the physical body and brain, there was a time when people said, well, it's like a steam engine, right? And consciousness is the power that's coming out of that engine. Or more recently, and people say, well, it's like a computer. The brain is the hardware, and the consciousness is the software running on that hardware. That has been for 50 years. That has been a very common metaphor. But the point is, we naturally gravitate toward physical, external things to understand a relationship about, or the nature of consciousness and about consciousness, because if objectivism is right, consciousness itself is an axiomatic concept. You can't take it apart, you can't analyze it. You can talk about its different forms: thought, emotion, desire, fear. All these things are forms of consciousness. But what it means to be conscious itself is not something you just understand it or you don't. It's like existence. You either get the concept or you don't.
I think that if it's true, which I think it is, that the mind emerges from physical operations, then it would make sense that the mind would operate in very similar ways to physical systems.
In some ways, yes. But the thing that is distinctive to the mind, as opposed to physical things, when I perceive something, when I think something, there's what we call intentionality in philosophy. It's aboutness. My perception is of or about the thing I'm seeing or hearing. If I say dogs bark, I'm saying that's just not a self-contained thought in my head. It has a reference, a direction out onto the world, in particular onto the world of dogs. And physical things don't have that. They have different kinds of relationships, but I don't think there's any case in in which you can say, this physical thing is of or about that one. Except, we can create a signal like a fire. The smoke you see smoke in the distance. That's a signal of fire, but that's only because that fire and smoke go together. Or you're on a boat that's in trouble and you raise a flag. Okay, well, that flag, it says something. I'm in trouble, but it only says that because that's the meaning we assign to it by convention or whatever. So physical things don't refer to each other, and that's whereas conscious states do, and that is a kind of categorical difference between mental and physical. But otherwise, your point is well taken. I agree with you that consciousness does emerge from the brain, and but it's not reducible to neural functioning. It has properties of its own.
Right, because of the law of identity. It has its own identity, which Rand said was itself identification of reality. So I guess things outside of our consciousness, they don't identify other things. And so that's what makes our consciousness unique in this world, is that we have this ability to convey our ideas and identify things. So yeah,
Right, that's well said.
it's a
Yeah.
fascinating topic to me because it's so unique to each person. Like you only have your own consciousness to deal with, and because unless you're a mind reader, which I don't believe in, but you only can see your own mind, and so you only have that one
Right.
reference for what consciousness is.
That's right, and that's part of the whole issue of understanding consciousness in philosophy and neuroscience and other fields. Absolutely.
Uh, David, I just wanted to switch a little bit. As I was doing this research of what other objectivists had said about propositions, I mean, I couldn't help but think about how this touches on the open closed debate, because it's like, since Rand didn't get around to writing on propositions, these other people, are they claiming it's consistent with objectivism? I mean, you've created a good space for us to say, hey, we can actually build on, what she's done. But I mean, are these are they even supposed to be thinking about propositions, or if it's part of objectivism?
Well, I think the people who subscribe to what we call the closed view of objectivism would say no. Rand Objectivism just what Rand said during her lifetime, or approved of during her lifetime by other writers, and that we still can build on her and discover things, but don't attribute to objectivism. And I think that's a blinkered kind of view. It makes objectivism almost like a dead language, like Latin. There's no Latin literature being created anymore. It's done. It's over. But and I don't think objectivism is done and over. But whether my paper is, I think it's consistent, as far as I've been able to tell, consistent with Rand's theory of concepts, which I built on, and I think it makes sense. And so it's a candidate objectivist theory, but this is only my paper. And a new idea has to stand the test of time and criticism and discussion before it gets maybe modified, maybe changed, whatever. So I'm putting this out there. This is what I think is true. This is what I think should be an objectivist theory of propositions. But honestly, I care a lot more about, did I get it right, than is it objectivism.
I love that dedication to objectivity. Go ahead, William.
Yeah. So I just, on that note, I want about your theory and whether it's right or not. I just want to know, like, what do you consider to be like a your genuine contribution or like the new ideas you're contributing. I know you talk about the difference between the intrinsic versus objective aspects of perception and concept and propositions. Can you flesh that out? And do you consider that a new idea?
That one, no. Rand drew that distinction, and it was elaborated by Nathaniel Brandon, and by Leonard Peikoff, I think, during her lifetime. So, I mean, I was in college, and an older student who was an objectivist explained it to me, and it was kind of but the trichotomy, so to speak, between intrinsic, objective, and subjective, and it blew my mind. And I said, I just answered so many questions in epistemology that I took it and ran with it. But it was kind of broad in the objectivist movement at the time. We're talking about the 60s. So
But the
is
way you apply it to your theory of propositions, do you think that's kind of a new way of approaching it?
yes. One of the things I say in the paper is that a fact has a status of being objective, not intrinsic in reality apart from us, but it's objective, meaning it's the way in which we grasp things in reality in the form or mode that our cognitive abilities allow us to do and require us to do. So it is that I think that's a extended or new use of the distinction between about objectivity, and I'm pretty confident of that. I would be surprised if if someone has an argument against it, I'm all ears, but I don't think if I could imagine an objection, I would have answered it. Let me put it that way.
So to be clear, you're saying that the objective portion of the proposition is the factual content, and the intrinsic portion is what's out there in reality apart from any proposition we make.
Exactly. The proposition is the thought that's in our minds. It's subjective, not in the sense of arbitrary or whim worship, but in the sense that it's in the mind as opposed to the world. What's intrinsic is out there in the world apart from the mind. But
So
cognition, we have the concept of the objective, which is reality as understood by a conscious mind, conceptual mind.
See that? So I agree with that. I think this goes to what I was maybe going to ask about objectivity is people tend to think objectivity is the intrinsic or like what's really out there, and they don't often grasp the fact that it's a relationship. You have to exist in order to figure out or to be objective and to figure out what objective truth is, because everything comes in a form of perception to us. And so we realize like what the fact is to us and like what the relationship of that outside object is to us. And that's what I consider objectivity. Do you agree with that?
I do. And I think it's, an important thing about the paper is that some of the other theories that I discuss along the way just have those two categories, intrinsic and, subjective or in the mind. And that makes it impossible for them to understand truth, or for that matter, concepts. And not many philosophers who are writing about truth and falsity even talk about concepts. Very few. And I mean, Rand was really unique, and it's because but her distinction between what's intrinsic out there and what's objective, as a relationship between our minds and reality, is I think that's why I think that's why the philosophy is named objectivism. That is an insight of such depth and importance that we're still exploring the implications.
That's great. Well, I want to, we're going to put up a link to the paper for people that want to read it and, even offer feedback. There's going to be a lot of discussion about it, I'm sure. I do want to switch gears a little bit here. We saw Harry Binswanger come out on the elections and claim he's holding his nose to vote for Kamala. And that's kind of like this, you have to hold your nose apparently as a standard, but just thoughts on which party or candidate maybe represents the bigger threat today.
Well, I'm not a political analyst, and I don't follow it the issues anywhere near as closely as you do, Scott, and probably you, William. But the part of it, I mean, both Trump and Harris have collectivist premises. They think the government should be doing this or that. That goes way beyond what the founders rated the government to do.
Yeah.
And
Galt's not on the ticket.
what?
John Galt is not on the ticket.
Yeah, well, that's too bad, but because that would make the vote easy if the founders were running. But anyway, they're both collectivists, and so to me, it comes down to which is a more dangerous form of collectivism, the more threatening. The left-wing, welfare state, semi-socialist views of Kamala Harris, or the somewhat paternalistic and nationalist collectivism of Trump. I'm more worried about the left than the right. I don't know if I can vote for Trump. I didn't vote the first time. I couldn't stand the guy, or maybe I did. I don't know. He was running against Hillary, whom I absolutely loathe. Maybe I did vote, but and then so. But I have kind of an out here in addition to my my specialization in a branch of philosophy that's pretty far removed from politics. I have an excuse in that I live in Washington, D.C., and so it doesn't matter how I vote on the presidential election. This is a Democratic town, the 80%, 90% Democrat. So, if I don't
you
vote,
get to see the threat of the left up close.
I do, yeah. Well, I ended my subscription to the Washington Post when they got too woke, too far left. So
Yeah.
Anyway,
no, that's a fair answer. If you can see the threat of the left, I can appreciate all that other stuff. There is one other thing I wanted to ask you about this Philadelphia Declaration. You and some other big names in the liberty movement got together with some pro-liberty religious people and came out with a statement of shared values, and we'll try to put that up as well. I think not only are you brave for doing so, but also the Christians who participated for even to stand up to the Orthodox ninnies on both sides. But as if I remember, you used to have more hesitance or resistance to working with religious groups, and I'm just wondering if you can talk a little about how you evolved on the topic.
Yeah, over the years, let me go back a step. A standard view of a philosophical system, and like objectivism or like any religion, starts with a view of the world, of metaphysics, and it works down from there. But many objectivists have applied that hierarchy, principles to historical things and the actual movement in time and practice of people across decades and centuries. And the more I've thought, the more I thought about it, I came to believe that believing in a philosophy at that level, or a religion at that level, is a big ticket item. It's like buying a fridge. You know, I could be the best salesman in the world, and I have trouble selling a new fridge to someone who just bought a new fridge. And I've become less concerned about that, because if people see the value, and this was true of the people who took part in, first of all, a conference last April, and then some lots of follow-up discussion. The people who took part were people, some religious, some were secular, but they all believed in a free society. They were all worried about threats from the left and the right, and they all, when the point of our discussions was, if you defend freedom, if you like a free society, then there are values that freedom depends on, in terms of, if people don't practice these values, government will step in. And if people don't, want to take responsibility for acting accordingly, then they won't support freedom politically. So we laid out a series of values, and it was subject to a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth. And that's what the Philadelphia Declaration is. It's a statement of, here are the underlying values that we think we share with freedom-loving people, whether of religious or secular orientation. And just a word about the origin of this. Last fall, Jay LaPierre, our chairman, and John Aguilaro, another board member, and myself, and I think Jag was involved too, said, where's the real threat coming from? And who are our real allies? And we looked at the libertarian movement, and objectivists have always been, felt some kind of kinship with libertarians because of the political overlap. But a lot of libertarians are either determinists or skeptics or relativists about values. And whereas a lot of religious people, whatever their religious practice, they believe in hard work, they believe in raising their kids with standards, they believe in being rational, at least in this life, or in things pertaining to this life.
Holding values.
And values, yeah, we share probably more with them. So let's give this a shot. And it was a brilliant idea. I think it was either Jay's or John's, I forget, but it just made so much sense. We ran with it. So that's the background for this. But I would urge people to, we're trying to create a movement where we've taken a lot of steps to implement it so far. And it's not a TA Atlas Society project per se, but it's very closely related. Jay LaPierre, John Aguilaro, and I, and Jag are still very involved in it. So it'll go up. I hope it'll go up.
Yeah, I just have to start with this first value. I'm somewhat amazed you got Christians to go along with this. Number one, reality is the ultimate standard of true and false, including essential moral truths. Reality sets constraints on our actions and achievements, but also offers abundant possibilities for choice, achievement, and progress. And that's no big compromise for objectivists. That's just that. And if Christians want to go along with that, welcome aboard, is my view. I think that's great that you're involved with that. I think it's great that you're thinking involved on the issue. I think there are a lot of objectivists that have been hesitant to work with libertarians and religious people, honestly, because they were worried about getting the David Kelley treatment.
Yeah.
And
well,
it takes a David Kelley to lead us forward.
Well,
I appreciate your independence. That's why I've been hanging out with you. So
yeah. No, thank you, Scott. Although, I was the chief author of this declaration, which we're going to post shortly. But Jay LaPierre really is the guy who's making this work operationally. We have set up we've got a couple of people who are going to be in effect, the operations managers, and we're going to locate it within Donors Trust, libertarian and conservative way for people to contribute money. Yeah, long story, but it's the project has, I think, will have legs. We'll see when it gets word gets around further.
Yeah, and I mean, Jay's been great. Jennifer Grossman, to her credit, I mean, she was, publishing "Can You Love God" and Ayn Rand back in 2016, and I think has been somewhat involved. I just think that there's and also, oh, Aglioloro you brought up. Any chance of us getting any kind of Atlas Shrugged update? Daily Wire had an option. Can you tell us anything?
Not really. There's no news. Daily Wire's option runs through this coming November. So their exclusive option will end then. And if they don't choose to continue the project, I don't know. A script has been written for the first of what would be 3 seasons. And I haven't seen the script though, and I have heard nothing basically all year. But John Aglioloro, who is running this deal, did tell me that the option, Daily Wire's option, expires in November, so that'll be a
We'll get some news then.
choice point.
Okay, good. Well, William, any final thoughts from you? And
Yes. First, I just want to thank you, David, for coming back on the program. And I read your paper and thought it was very insightful, and I learned a lot of stuff. So I'm glad there's people like you out there applying Rand's theories to their own ideas. And I just want to leave you with this one question, kind of a pet question I have. Rand had this idea of the anti-concept, and she defined it as an unnecessary and rationally unusable term designed to replace and obliterate some legitimate concept.
Right.
I wonder if you think there's a counterpart in propositions, if there's such a thing as like an anti-proposition.
That's a great question. I haven't really thought about it. Most of the anti-concepts, any proposition involving them is already corrupt because of the corruption of the concepts involved. Like, the classic example is Proudhon's statement. He was a socialist in the 19th century, statement that property is theft. Well, of course, theft means just stealing of property. So it's being used to undermine the concept of property, which is a contradiction. I mean, Proudhon is using the taking a concept of theft and misusing it to mean any appropriation of property, and to undermine the whole concept of property. So that proposition, property is theft, that is a proposition, and it's anti-conceptual, but because of the misuse of the concepts involved. I'd have to think more, William, about whether there are distinctive forms of anti-propositions.
One of the anti-concepts she identified was ethnicity. And I think that's a big one because you hear that a lot, in ethnic theory.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's a lot of anti-propositions using that term.
I'm sure there are, yeah. And I mean, the whole, idea of identity politics is really built on anti-concepts like ethnicity. It's, what makes that an anti-concept is you ask, okay, what do all people of an ethnic group have in common? Well, something not essential, just the background and maybe their looks. But, you know, they can be Democrat, Republican, they can be objectivist, they can be subjectivist, they can be day laborers or brilliant business people, whatever. I mean, ethnicity leaves out all the things that make individuals distinctive and are essential to their being, to any individual's being. And ethnicity is way down the list. You know, I don't think there's a fallacy involved in saying, well, you know, my background is, say, you know, Scotch-Irish. I mean, if you go back far enough in my family tree, that's what you find, people from northern Scotland and Northern Ireland. But that really doesn't say much about me. It's just, you know, people get involved in family trees and what is it called?
Genealogy.
Genealogy. Yeah, thank you.
Well, she would say that it's packaging together concepts that don't go together necessarily, like race and culture. You know, so ethnicity is trying to blend certain things that
Okay.
aren't necessarily compatible, you know, or can't be integrated. So it's kind of like a package deal or using
We can
stolen.
let David think about it and even do an episode about it and share his answer or bring him back.
Yeah.
All right. I know we're at the end of our hour or past it. So, William, it's a great question to leave on, and I will think about it some more.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Well, David, again, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for all that you do. And we look forward to hearing more about the progress of the Philadelphia Declaration.
Okay. I'm sure you will.
Good. And we'll have a link up to your propositions paper. Thanks a lot. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.